Yeah, I'm going to be talking for about 40 minutes, I think. There will be a 15-minute video in the between where you can rest from my voice. And I don't want to go chronologically through my work, although I want to look back at where some things came from. I want to talk mostly about what has inspired me throughout the past to do certain works. So let me just get started with the first piece. And the inspiration actually came from, well, let me read the quote first, because this quote is kind of important for me. This is by W.G. Sebald, a German writer who lived in England. He died about 10 years ago. And this is a quote from the book Vertigo. "It was a severe disappointment when some years ago, looking through some old papers, he came across an engraving and was obliged to concede that his recollected vision of that town in the evening sun was nothing but the copy of that very engraving." And to me, that really signifies how memory works, that memory over time simplifies and boils down to a more collective memory, also gets overruled by your current experiences, and things that happened since your original experience will be replaced. What stays is, however, an emotional memory where you know exactly how you felt when you saw it or when you experienced something, but you do no longer remember like how many people were in the room, was the room sloped, which lights were on, and all those things. And I work mostly, inspired by scenes I see, experiences I have, but also by artwork I've seen, literature, and so on. In this case, it was a photograph I found at some point, somewhere, saw it. I can no longer remember where and what and how. I tried to find it again, and I never did. So eventually, I just said, you know what? If I can't find it, I rebuild it. And this is how I work. I build small-scale models and stage them, photograph them to make them look like as if they could be real. If you look closer, there are enough clues in there that it's not the real world, it is a model world. But at first sight, I want you to kind of be able to believe this could be real. Kind of looks like Brooklyn. So I built this scene inspired by this photograph, printed it, and I showed it to my gallerist, which at that time was Achim Möller Gallery in the Upper East Side. And he looked at it and immediately say, Carthez, Paris, Meudon. And you see that original photo on the right. After he gave me that information, I immediately was able to find that image. But just looking on the internet with keywords of figuring out, locomotive, bridge, whatever I remembered from that photo, I could not find anything. I found all kinds of stuff, but not this one. So, but obviously I changed a few things. It's no longer a vertical image, it's horizontal. It's no longer in Paris, it's in Brooklyn. Kind of the bridge is tall, but actually it's a little taller on the right because of the vertical format. So, in fact, for this image, I recycled a lot of models I had used for other sets before, and you're going to see some of my models reappearing again. But as I was just mentioning, Googling this image, I've always been really fascinated by books, and I want to use that subject matter of books as an example of also how my work progresses over the years. In fact, over 10 years ago, I started working with books, carving them out of soap. I was teaching at the De La Coste School of the Arts in south of France for Bard College, and went to the local market, and they had these beautiful tables with the colorful displays of the Savon de Marseille. Can you translate that?
No.
the beautiful olive oil soap in France with all kind of fragrances. And they were sorted by color, very much like the display here next door with the color pencils in the window. So I thought, like, oh my God, this looks like an artist's window display. I have to get at least one color of each of these soaps. And I had no idea what to do with them. This is another way of how I get inspired. I see something and I think, oh my God, I fell in love with it, but I have no idea what, I'm not going to wash myself that much. But this is more than a lifetime's worth of soap. And then, of course, my students saw that, and then they started giving me soap. And how embarrassing. Students give you soap. But among the one bars of soap was one of the thin hotel bars. I thought, oh my God, that looks like a book. And an idea was born. So I started sawing the big chunks of Savon de Marseille up and started to carve them into small books and started to arrange them. In this case, I got inspired by the architecture of the Papal Palace in Avignon, which was nearby, and just said, you know, no one would have lived like this in an empty palace with just stone walls. So I, in my mind or in my model, I moved in with a whole library. So these are all books, single books carved out of soap. And, well, the previous one was color, and this is black and white. My primary photographic printing process is an old 19th century photographic process. It's called photogravure, in which a photograph is etched into a copper plate. Anyone is interested, I can talk a little bit more after the lecture. I don't want to bore you with technical detail. But it's a beautiful process which ends up with real etching ink on a rag paper, but in a photographic way, in a beautiful tonal range. So that's why these are all black and white, even though these were all beautiful, colorful soaps. But the previous one I had to do because I needed to do the colors. This is a Polaroid transfer. Then this is all from about 2000 and 2001, so about 12 years ago. And then last year, I revisited this whole idea, and it came about because I did a collaboration with my wife, which I will also briefly introduce, which we called a bookmobile for dreamers. The idea was really, and going back to the idea of Googling things, the lost art of just discovering something while going through stacks of books and seeing, oh, I love that yellow jacket. I wonder what's in this book. You open it up, and you have no idea what will hit you. It may be something that you never thought even existed. If you do all your reading and book ordering through the internet, they will say, if you like this, you may like that. Other customers with your taste also bought this. And it's kind of a predictable algorithm of what you may like or may not like, but it doesn't expand your horizon in an unexpected turn. So I this was our swan song to the demise of the actual library and to the browsing through Google. And it was, in fact, a collaboration with my wife, who is a composer and theremin player. And it was about a 40-minute collaboration with recorded sound, live theremin, and video projection. As part of those video setups, I also made, well, various prints, of which one, this is one. And now, has anyone been recently at the MoMA? Have you seen the Magritte show? I was inspired. Actually, before the show happened, I was so happy it happened just, after I made this print about. But this was inspired by the painting by Magritte, Time Transfixed, in which a steam engine rolls out of a fireplace with full steam and smoke, but it's very static at the same time. So here my steam engine is rolling into the library. And I call this series Library Dreams. Another one is, oh boy, yeah. The inspirations are actually kind of multiple here, but it is initially inspired by Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, the city of stilts, Zenobia, which of course I set up in the library itself. The The trailers. The trailers, they happened when I walked along New York streets at one point and came upon a construction site. And there was not enough room for the construction trailer, for the office trailer to be on the street level, so they just put it on the awning above the sidewalk. I looked up there, this is kind of odd, having a trailer up in the first floor, but I thought it was pretty ingenious. And when I first moved to the United States, which was in '87, I'm originally from Germany, so now here's some biographical information. The one thing that fascinated me, and which is much more prevalent in the West than it is here in the East Coast, how many people live in trailer parks? Oh my God, it's such a quintessentially American thing for me, a trailer park. Of course, you can't have that in New York because the space is at a prime, so we kind of have to put our trailers in stacks and stack them up like high rises. So I thought, this is the perfect combination. And the trailers are all built out of book pages, which I folded and glued together like you do in grade school with a little paper cube. And here is the bookmobile itself, built out of, again, mostly scavenged materials that inspired me when they first threw it out, which is, garden rake, a shovel for the roof. Garden rake is right here. Then the housing is made out of Brooklyn tin ceiling. And then the back is a old cigar box in which I put some little plaster casts of books. So it's my bookmobile, my Brooklyn bookmobile, and the Italian bookmobile, because a good part of this we did during my Guggenheim year in Italy. I had a residency at the same time in the Ligurian coast at the Bugliasco Foundation. And what I loved there were these little tricycles which were rolling up and down those steep streets. So I loaded it up with a lot of books, and here's my Italian bookmobile, again made out of a cereal box, book parts, and book pages. And I've mentioned earlier already that my images frequently get reused and recycled. So my trailer tower made it on top of a floating book, floating in the Gowanus Canal down near Fairway and Red Hook, before Sandy. But I like the idea about the floating book even post-Sandy, because that would be a very safe way, even if the floods surge, because you would float up or down depending on how the tide goes. And to me, that is also a kind of a transcending idea of knowledge, which are contained in books. So there's a lot of things that come together, none of which were really intentional. I was really reacting more visually and playing around by juxtaposing elements I had and had been working with to do this image. But after the fact, it worked, I thought. The next one, which actually we started out with, that planet that was turning. Maybe some of you noticed that high-rise was slowly turning. Was in fact inspired by Exupéry's The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince, a wonderful book which I hope you all have read. And if you have not, it's really written for adults, even though it looks like a children's book. Here are some two illustrations from that book, and it is about this little prince who lives on a planet with 3 volcanoes, one of which is extinct, and the other ones he has to clean out. You see him cleaning it out. And he's a little lonely. And then he goes around and visits other planets. And each of the planets he visits is absurd to the utmost degree. For example, the one on the right, he visits the lamplighter, but his planet rotates so quickly that he has no time to talk to the little prince, because it's an old-fashioned gas light. He has to light during the day and then extinguish. So he's constantly working on his duty, but it's his duty, but there's no one on the planet. So what? It's my duty. I have to do this. I can't talk to you. Sorry, I'm busy. So the little prince frustratedly goes on and moves on. So I kind of used this as a metaphor of my own the German coming through. For my own life, and created a planet with 3 volcanoes. However, it also has a running fence and a lot of watchtowers. I left Germany. I actually was born in the year the Berlin Wall was built, and I left Germany before it was torn down. So I came here in '87. It ended in '89. So I know Germany only as a divided country. It's not the only divided country, as I believe, in the world. So yeah, anyway, it's kind of the idea of dividing a country, separating people from each other for some ideological reasons, I think is utterly absurd to me, just as much as that lamplighter is so busy all the time. So, and I made these pieces also as color images, or as sculptures. So they're pieces which are now not just a sculpture to be photographed, but also exist as a hanging sculpture. They're about 20 inches across, this one. And I made also a video of it. It's kind of a low resolution, I'm sorry, but so just as if we fly over, because in a still image you don't see that ongoing fence. You don't know if on the other side there may be not like a checkpoint Charlie or something. After living in Germany, I emigrated to the United States. This is the Santa Maria, Nina, and the Pinta chasing each other's tail. So they're not actually really, I call it the discovery planet. In fact, they're really not discovering anything because they're all just floating in their own trails. But from the perspective of each of these boats, you think like, oh, you're going on to the next new land, discovering something new. But they're just chasing each other's tail. And then I moved ultimately to New York. So it became like this thing for myself. And then I moved to Brooklyn. This is my idea of 4th Avenue when they started a few years ago building high-rises. They've succeeded with a lot more since. It's kind of at the same time, it was my idea of taking those new high-rise constructions and hurling them with a root ball out into space. And in fact, I did that later, so you will see that. The next inspiration is going way back in art history. This is an artist which I feel very a close affinity to. It's Giovanni Battista Piranesi, born about 240 or so years before me on the same day. We have to share the same birthday. So anyway, he was an architect from Venice who emigrated to Rome. Now, back then, and especially in Europe, you emigrated into a foreign country, even if it's today all modern-day Italy. So in Rome, they said, what do you want, you Venetian? What do you want here in Rome? We have our own architects. You don't get any job because we have our own. So he had to do the second best thing, use his skills as a draftsman and draw views of Rome. And he's actually became very famous and very successful at it too. He sold a lot of those prints to the then emerging tourist trade and made good money. But he was never really a creative person in the way that he created his own architectural spaces. Until he worked on a series which is called Imaginary Prisons, which he was himself inspired by the excavations of the Villa Adriana in Tivoli near Rome. And this was a vast city almost. It's called villa. It was a villa for an emperor, but it was a city with all the support staff, which was mostly buried. And they started to excavate it and saw these huge vaults which stuck in the ground. You could just imagine how much deeper will this go? How much deeper do we have to dig to find the bottom of this? So in his mind, he then drew the spaces of what he calls the imaginary prisons, or the carcery series. He published them as well, sold them. For after about 20 years, he got bored with them, I guess. That's my guess. Printing the same thing over and over again for 20 years, I would get bored with it. So he took the plates, and this is what I love also about printmaking, is it's one of the few techniques in which more than one image can exist parallel. If you do a painting, you destroy the painting by reworking it. If you do a sculpture, you chisel something away, it's gone. In printmaking, you can make a print, then work on the matrix, on the plate itself, change that plate, and make a new state. So he did this. So he sold for 20 years, he sold the first state. So it was a perfectly legitimate state in his mind. 20 years later, he did a much more dramatic version. You can see the differences here. He opened up that gate here into a big, vast space. He defined this cloudy area with some gatehouses and so on. And he made the whole mood of the image much more dramatic. So I knew him since art school. He's always been my hero, especially as a printmaker. But then I thought, you know what? I should build my own imaginary prison. So I just put everything away, and I always work from memory, so I do not work from by looking at it or by measuring it. I don't make a plan before, so I work very intuitively, very much like as if I would work on a drawing. Start drawing, say, oh, that doesn't work, erase a little bit, draw again. So I did this, but in a sculptural way. Specifically, I was inspired by these two images. So they became an amalgam of those two different images. The right one is called the Round Tower. The left one, I forgot. So ultimately, my goal was, of course, to make a print, and also to make a print in two different versions. So here is my first version of the print. And here's my second one. I can go back and forth. I sort of tried to do the same thing as Piranesi did. I did not wait 20 years. I just printed a limited edition for the first one and then changed the print for the second one. Now I'm going to show you the video, which is about 15 minutes long, with music by my wife, Elizabeth Brown. And you'll actually see parts of the creative process. So for me, it was also showing the creative process as an artist. And this is Piranesi version 2. There's my root ball flying into space. Here are my prints again. There are two versions. The initial version of the Piranesi ended with the print. I'd really thought this would be just about the creative process but my creative process, of course, building the model to the finished prints. But then I had this big model sitting in my studio. I did not know what to do with it. And my wife got a grant to go to live in Japan for about 5 months. So I joined her, and yeah, things happened. And when I came back, I thought, you know what? I don't need to hold on to this model. I can use the model just like I did to the first state of the print. I can cut back into it. I can change it. So that's when the version 2 started to happen. I thought, you know, I can take Piranesi into the 21st century. Well, we share the same birthday. Maybe I'm his reincarnation. Maybe I can just continue where he left off. He didn't see the subways. You know, now in Rome, there are subways everywhere underneath the ground, and they're going through old antiques, and the web of old and new is getting just tighter and tighter. So I was really fascinated from this project in how cities grow, how they reinvent themselves, how things in cities get repurposed while staying the same. But you know, in New York City, the Grand Central Terminal is, in fact, a very good example of that, which almost was torn down in the 80s. No, when was it? I think, in the early 80s, when it had outlived its original purpose, but then was reinvented in great part by conservation efforts by Jackie and Onassis Kennedy, but is now actually a vibrant meeting place and a wonderful space to go to. And a huge tourist attraction, so I'm really glad they didn't tear it down. But if you look at the views of Rome by Piranesi, you will see that the Colosseum is actually populated by people, that there are stables in there. And in fact, the Colosseum is one of the the quintessential old buildings in Rome, which I love because it has been reinvented. It was first used for naval battles with ships because it was in swamplands until they drained it. Then it was used for gladiator fightings and feeding Christians to the lions and so on. All the things you've seen in the bad Hollywood movies. But then, after the Roman Empire fell, it was used as fortresses, as monastery, as farmland, as stables, as housing, and as quarry for new buildings. So they would just mine all the old bricks, tear them down, and build something new with them. So, but it was so big they never could finish the job, so it survived. And now it's, of course, a tourist attraction. So 2,000 years later, it still stands. So the idea was really taking this space and repurposing it through the good and the bad. I mean, when the Colosseum was used as stables, it wasn't really its most glorious days. You know, they just put some raw fences up and used the rest of the walls as their building. So I thought maybe I could just put some trailers in here. And this was, in fact, my initial idea, using trailers in a stacked version. Then I repurposed it and made it into a Grand Central Station terminal. Subways are already up in there. And then it became kind of a more New York version. I started to build a tenement building right in the front and exaggerated the trailer towers. And in fact, this is a direct quote of what I had seen. It was in front of the State Theater, in fact. And then again, I had always preached to my students, rework your plates. Once you've done made the plate and you have some good prints, you have to use the plate and rework it and try something else out with it. So don't just be satisfied with the finished print. So I took this own medicine in this process, in this project, and I finally did it myself. I was always reluctant to do it myself, so I did it also to a few other plates, where I then turned it more and more into New York. And my whole project turned from looking, kind of celebrating Piranesi's work directly into looking at New York, my own chosen town, like Piranesi would have looked at Rome in his imaginary prison series. So I am now looking at New York with different eyes, also with kind of a nostalgic feel. As an immigrant, I kind of looked when I would go to places wanted to travel. As a young adult, I didn't really have money to buy travel guides as I wanted. So I went to the local library and checked out what they had, books from the 50s, and looked at places like Italy and said, oh my God, they live backwards there. This was then the 70s or early 80s. Or books from New York. Actually, my aunt had a beautiful book which she had brought back from when she lived here in New York. It was printed in 1898. So you can imagine New York has changed a little bit. Also, Italy had changed a little bit from the 1950s to 70s. But so my expectation of what I was going to see and the reality never matched up. So I always then looked for the old, like, where is it? Where is this beautiful thing I saw in the photos? It all looks so different. So my whole attitude towards discovering things had to change. So I just created my own world. This is all part of looking at Piranesi, looking at New York like Piranesi would have looked at Rome. And it becomes sort of an alternate reality, New York that never really existed, but that could have existed if we had taken a different turn in history. Like if the Nazis in Germany hadn't gotten to power and the Americans hadn't kept Germans from buying helium for their airships, so they had to use hydrogen instead, which caused the Hindenburg to blow up over Lakehurst, New Jersey in a thunderstorm because it was highly flammable, which brought the whole era of airship travel to an end. just one little turn that could have turned out differently. Let's not get these dictators into power ever again, I would say. So this is looking at yesterday's cities of tomorrow, I call this. Then, of course, I had to work with a few landmarks of New York. And again, I quoted. Anyone seen that photo before? Yes, of course, right? You've seen the original before. But there is, in fact, a very famous photograph by Edward Steichen on the right. Photographed a little earlier, and you can see there's really hardly any high buildings nearby. And it's a carriage, but you know, I no longer really live in the era of carriages. I take subways, so I put a High Line there. There never was a High Line in front of the Flatiron Building. So, but it's my artistic freedom. This is another quote from Paul Strand. In this case, the snow was flour, which I sifted onto the model. The smoke is cotton balls, hot glued on a wire frame. After this, this show was at Leslie Haller Gallery almost 2 years ago, not quite 2 years ago. And some representatives from the MTA Arts and Transit Commission saw the show and approached me to do a work for the 100-year anniversary of Grand Central Terminal, which happened this year. They were planning a show at Grand Central Terminal at the Transit Museum, and I started building a model. And you can actually see the outside of the model has never really quite looks the same. And if you have seen the art card in the subway, you may see a couple of things that look familiar. I was imagining, again, the repurposing of space. How could the Grand Central Terminal have been repurposed in a different way than they actually did? After train travel was in decline and it has been replaced by air travel, it's like, you know, I think it's pretty awful to have to schlep all the way out to JFK, take an hour on the subway, schlep all your bags. It would have been so much easier to just go from the train right into an airship and then just take those big glass walls out of the end of the Grand Concourse and use this as an airplane hangar for those airships. So they could go in and out. This is actually at the museum in the installation still. Crash, actually. I like that too. Here is my art card. You may have seen it. And my real purpose when I built that model, the art card was in fact an afterthought by the MTA after they saw my model. My real purpose was to do this image. A lot of work for one image, but I do what I have to do. So, yeah, airships in Grand Central. I specifically bought a fog machine for this process because there is this beautiful photograph of Grand Central, which you may have seen. It's the windows, sunlit windows of the Grand Concourse at Grand Central, where the sun is pouring in, but the air is so smoky. They used to allow smoking in Grand Central Terminal, so it was so stiff with air, like with smoke, that the light looked like solid chunks of white, like leaned against the wall. So they were really, I wanted to recreate that. That never quite worked, but I still like the atmosphere in this piece. Just to finish this off, especially in an educational institution, I like to kind of give you a little overview where I actually came from. Like, you know, I'm going to go like a very brief history lesson, what I did when I was your age. Heavy German thing, heavily influenced by Anselm Kiefer and other like post-war German guilt-ridden work. again, but again, still, there is, looking back, it's kind of funny to look at these and say, like, oh, this is actually pre-war Berlin, before the destruction, although I'm drawing it like this is already destructed. But to fast forward, I then lived, for my first year in San Francisco, I was still an art student for the first year there, 87. I lived in a squat, in a loft, and there was a lot of electric wiring lying around in the hallways from some, I don't know what that was doing there, but it was a lot of copper. It was before copper was so expensive that everyone was stealing it. So I just started using those copper pieces as drawing material, as a three-dimensional drawing, and then superimposed them over these heavy German paintings. I actually had brought that with me to show, and I thought, you know what? This is too heavy. This is San Francisco. It's sunny, it's beautiful, people are happy. I can't do this heavy German thing anymore. So it was kind of for me the break of painting these light wires floating over this dark kind of painting over there. I never sold any of these, but I mean, they were really, just sort of transitional pieces. And then, again, a few years later, I had a job at Crown Point Press in San Francisco, which is a print publisher working. At that point, I worked with Christian Boltanski and had to learn this process, photogravure, which I mentioned earlier, which is this etching process. So I thought, oh, I have all these wires. A friend was selling me his 4x5 camera for very little money because he needed money desperately. So I started to use that camera and learned photography. Never had taken a photo class in my life before. Never actually taken an etching class in my life before either. I learned on the job at Crown Point Press. I was a lithographer mostly. And then I learned the process of photogravure on the project with Christian Boltanski, and then practicing on my own work at the same time. First I noticed that my models were too small for the lens I had. I had really no idea what the numbers on the lenses meant, but I had a 4x5 piece of film with a tiny little speck of a wire on there if I photographed it right and had to move it so far away to get it in focus. So I was like, why am I using this big film for this tiny little thing? I can use a 35mm lens. So a film. So I just used a magnifying glass, held in front until it was focused, and then click. That's how I learned photography. So, but I fell in love with the distortion of the. So you can see up there, it goes all out of focus. And then after I did with the first series, I did 25 wire boats. I graduated to 20 spud boats. That was back to my spuds, like potatoes. Went back to my German roots, potatoes, carved potatoes, and let them dry in the sun, San Francisco sun. So the bottom is like 2 samples of the 25 spud boats. A few years later, again, I continued working with spuds, in this case, rutabaga. So I'm always in search for new material. So I carved a medieval village out of a single rutabaga. It's when I met my wife. She was in love with this. And then I graduated to more natural materials like firewood, twigs, and toilet paper. Clay. In fact, this is a toy thing. It's one of the few. Actually, there was a toy in the previous one as well, in the Rutabaga City. But this is Zeppelin over Timbuktu. And again, another example of the Zeppelins reoccurring. This was about 2001 or 2002. And then 10 years later, the Zeppelins came back. And then also in this was 96, at a residency at McDowell. Firewood, twigs, and toilet paper boat time. I restaged the Fram, or it could also be the Shackleton disaster, in a parking lot during a very heavy snowy winter. I had a lot of fun there. Emptied whole buckets of water on the parking lot to create like a really slippery area. Oy. And then my models became bigger and bigger. When I started out, like those spud boats and those wires, they were very much like product photography. I was more interested in photographing the object as is. And then the objects became more and more part of a world, so I wanted to photograph it from within its world. So I'm like working with perspective. I'm going down onto the ground and the camera looking into the street level. This is the first crossing of the Hudson River with an airplane, I guess. But of course, it plays off on Blériot's crossing of the English Channel in his plane, the first crossing of the English Channel. Couple of more photos here. The series which I did when my wife had a residency in Maine for a few weeks, and I was able to come along. What do they have in Maine? They have lighthouses. So I did a whole series I called Caution Not to be Used for Navigation, which is, if you've ever been in Maine and get one of those napkins in a lobster place, it has usually like a little map of the sea coastline there, and they always have a disclaimer, caution, not to be used for navigation. It's the American way, because if you didn't have that, you could sue them if you drown or run aground somewhere. I thought this napkin was accurate. So if you've ever been to Europe, if you look at the cobblestones in Europe, they have now engraved them with a little disclaimer that says, caution, surface may be uneven. That's for the American tourists. I'm kidding. So anyway, this is my nor'easter, and the lighthouse is just soldering, the tip of a soldering gun with an American flag wrapped around with the stars cut off. Don't tell anyone, because I think it was a sticker, so it was not a real American flag. But it just used the red and white stripes. Although you can't see it. I almost drowned my camera in this one. And the last one I wanted to show you is Flat Earth, which was in fact a pretty, one of my most elaborate outdoor setups, which I have done so far. It's at a waterfall at Bard College. And I had to build a whole rig out of metal with counterweights and screwed the ships to this rig. The rig had to fit over this concrete dam so that the force of the water wouldn't push them over. Unfortunately, in New England, you don't find that wide open landscape they have in the West. So it's one of the few pieces I had to use Photoshop in to replace the trees in the background and the grasses with a sky. But I photographed the sky in the same direction, the same area, same direction of into the sky, same day. I thought of hanging a big sheet there, but then I realized the sun would have cast big shadows on that sheet, and it would have just been as bad. And the span between one side of the closest tree on one side and the closest tree on the other side was about as long as this room is. I didn't want to drown, so I did Photoshop in this one. I'm going to try to show you the book mobile trailer. So anyone has any questions? Yeah, my degree at the art school in Germany was, had a major in printmaking and a minor in experimental filmmaking. This was with Super 8 film back then. I abandoned that pretty much completely when I moved to the United States. I didn't have the facilities. I had one little editing, what do you call these things? I forgot. So I did a few things in the United States, but then abandoned it when I got a job in printmaking, and that just took over my life. But then about 2005, I started up again when video and computer editing became feasible and affordable. And I just fell in love. And that first video I asked my wife, can I use some of your music? And it was a revealing experience to work with her music, and it kind of really worked together. She was very happy what I'd done with it, and kind of said, oh, you know, you gave my piece a second life, because she's a new music composer. Frequently her pieces will get performed once, maybe a second time, but it's very expensive to put on a show, especially as, you know, you think as an artist you'll have it difficult. You know, then there are the composers, and then there are the poets. So a lot of the pieces, they would be performed once, maybe recorded, but not even published on a CD. But after I made a video with it and used her music, it actually existed as another standalone piece. And then we've done the Bookmobile, I think, was our 6th collaboration. There were a couple of bigger and a couple of smaller ones. And it was also conceived pretty much parallel. So we worked together. She worked on some compositions. I worked on visuals. And I tried different music with the visuals. I showed her the visuals. She said, oh, I want to try this music. It never exactly ended up the way the music I thought would work with the visuals, or vice versa. She wrote for the visuals, never ended up exactly what we had intended initially. This was much more fluid. But we actually were on in an artist residency in Italy for 4 weeks during that core time creating that piece. But I'm already way off your initial question, which was, are there any other artists? Yes, there are artists which work with model making and photographing. There's James Casebeer, who works much more with much more reality-based models of things that actually do exist or could exist. There is like Robert Park Harrison, who creates sort of his own world. He always acts in them. Actually, Robert and Shana Park Harrison, I should say. He's giving his wife credit as a collaborator as well, but building models. Then there's Thomas Demand, for example, and so on. His work is too German to me, though, even though I am German too, but it's very stiff. It's all made out of paper, and it's almost more important that it is made out of paper than what he depicts, I think. There's no soul in his pieces. In terms of video, everyone asked me if I know Kentridge. I do. I hope I'm a little different than Kentridge. And yeah, there are a lot of artists dabble in animation.
Do you know the Quay brothers?
Oh yes, I do.
They
Yeah.
just came to SVA.
Oh really? Oh cool. Yeah.
I missed it.
Yeah, yeah. That was a beautiful show at the MoMA a while ago. They had for the Brothers Quay. Yes. Okay. It actually started a lot earlier.
Yeah.
My mother was a big enabler. So she's a great school teacher and a very accomplished violinist. But besides the point. But she worked with us sort of with crafts projects when we were kids. And we got very early on a section in the basement where we could work with woods. We got a hammer, we got the saw and stuff, and little plywood. So I remember the very first thing I built was a little upright piano. And my mom still has that, and I actually made a photogravure of that years ago. I photographed it in her house. So, but it was kind of, oh my God, I did that when I was 11. So, and I have done things ever since. And in fact, when I was in art school and did that heavy German thing, I needed work which I call rest and recreation. I could just call it fun stuff on the side, which I don't consider as my serious artwork. And in fact, I built paper models. And I ended, in the Bookmobile for Dreamers, I ended up using some of those video, Super 8 transferred onto video. I used some of the shots. There is in fact a parallel shot where I'm pulling that little tricycle along the Italian road. There is one where I'm pulling a paper station wagon with like stationary stiff wheels. It sort of it just wobbles over the cobblestones in Germany on a string along a street. And then all these 1970s cars are pulling by. So, you know, they talk in the video, so it goes way back. And yeah, I never knew that my fun part would actually become my serious part. My serious part would fall by the wayside. So, but you never know what's going to happen. So take your dabble serious. Oh, that's a heavy question. I think I have a few things, but what comes to mind, what I just told my intro to printmaking students who are all freshmen this year, this week, that you know, they're all getting very quickly very frustrated. Oh, I'm not good at this. Then I tell them that about Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers, in fact, specifically the 10,000-hour rule, where in this book, Malcolm Gladwell tries to debunk the whole idea of talent. Talent doesn't really exist. Talent may be existing in a state that something grabs your attention that you want to continue doing it. But in fact, it's 95% work. So if you work hard and you continue working hard and you're actually not just doing a half an hour a day and think, oh, I did my job now, I want to do some video games. But if you're really thinking like, oh, I'm in my studio, oh my God, I want to do more. It's like, oh, man, I want to finish this. Oh, I have an idea for the next one. And if that happens and you just work and work and work, even though if it's bad, you're going to make it. Hard work and staying power is way more important than talent. Talent is secondary. I think that's sort of the latest one I've kind of been saying, but there are a few other. I told you before too?
Yeah.
I think that was before I even read Malcolm Gladwell's book.
Yeah.
But that gave me sort of more power to it.
90% hard work, 10%
Right.
talent.
Yeah. Okay, photogravure is a continuous tone photographic etching process which Fox Talbot invented in about 1840s. Oh, I like anecdotes, by the way. So there's going to be 6 sentences. He is also the inventor of the salted paper print. He invented that silver salts blacken under the influence of light when developed. The one thing he did not invent was the fixer. Big problem. Because he tried to promote his invention by publishing 600 salted paper prints in a magazine. He didn't quite make that number. That was one big minus point against him. He ran out of the town's water supply dry, I think. So there was not enough water to rinse them and rinse them and rinse them to get all that silver back out. And then the rest of them started to fade as soon as the subscribers opened the magazine. It went away. So he became, that was a big humiliation for him. And again, back to the hard work, he then dedicated 25 years of his life to invent a process that would be A, archival, would not fade, B, faster to reproduce, and fast in the mid-18th century was a different speed as what we think of it today. And yeah, fast and easier reproducible. Yeah, fast. I guess that goes together. So he invented this process, photogravure, in which he sensitized gelatin with potassium dichromate, the same ingredients you're using in silkscreen emulsion, which hardens it, makes it insoluble to water, but it would make the gelatin soluble in degree, from hardening from the surface down to various thicknesses. So he could develop out the unhardened gelatin and would be left with thicker gelatin in the highlights and thinner gelatins in the shadows, and gradually more or less gelatin in the gray values in between. He then would aquatint it, ask a printmaker what an aquatint is, and then etch the plate, whereas the thinnest gelatin would start to break down first and etch the longest time, while the thicker areas would resist the etch for a lot longer time and then start only in the very end to etch. So you would have a continuous tone aquatinted, photographic aquatint, where your shadows have etched in for maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and your highlights have just barely started to etch and have just the lightest tone. So you get this beautiful tonal range. And when I was in art school, I hated photography. It was just surface to me. It was like this manufactured paper with just surface on it. I did not like it. So I was not interested in it. I used the camera for snapshots, but didn't do anything with it, really, except looking at them and drawing from them. So like a photographic sketchbook. But then when I learned photogravure in the when was it? Late 80s, early 90s. I just totally fell in love with it because it had that tactile quality, had the ink in the shadows, and I should have brought a sample.
Yeah.
When I do a lecture out of town, I always have them with me. Here, I thought, oh, I travel light, and I don't have one.
Oh, that was hard.
I deserved it. Not always, but sometimes I do, yes. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes just to fix. If I have, like, it's easy to get like a pinhole or some like white speck on there, and if it's, if it interferes with the nature of the image, I'll touch that up. Like those zeppelins in that atmospheric, that would have interfered. But I do like actually to see the hand or see the process or the flaws in the process. So I don't mind if something doesn't work out perfectly as long as the feeling of the image is still there. So it's very much like an old glass plate negative where the image is so crisp and real in there, but then it's broken and you actually see it in two halves, abutted with this big crack in between. But it still draws you in, and I don't mind that at all. So it's sort of like that. Boy, that's a hard question. I mean, I teach primarily at Bard. I know that at Cooper Union, the interest in intaglio and etching has been declining a bit. and the interest in silkscreen is enormous, fast, cheap, and easy. And I always tell my students, what we're teaching in printmaking is sort of the history, the old, outdated technology, which has been kind of would have fallen by the wayside if it had been for the industry, because the industry is always about faster, cheaper, and easier, quicker, and we artists are the stupid ones who kind of continue the tradition. But actually at Bard we have a very vibrant printmaking department, so there's a lot of students interested in it. And it's a relatively small department, so we're not talking about hundreds of students, but it's still quite present. So it's a hard question to sort of generalize, and I may not just know enough in average about other schools. And I walked by your print studios today, and there seemed to be quite some activity going on in there. So it seems like it's not dead yet. And I know there are schools, or have been schools, which said, oh, out with printmaking, in with computers, which is such a short-sighted thing. That is sort of the same attitude they had when photography came into real being in the late 1900s. And they said, out with painting, in with photography. Painting's still not dead, so I think they miscalculated back then. And I think if we did this, we would miscalculate today, yes. Well, initially when I did these bleak city scenes, and I did not only do aerial scenes back then, I also did street scenes, I always omitted the people. And I felt like, I never liked drawing the human figure. I mean, I did it in art school, but I just never liked it. And I always felt like the human figure in the piece, suddenly it would keep me out of it. So I felt like if the place is empty, I can much more transpose myself into the scene than if there's already someone there, which is drawn in a awkward or weird or just stylistically, I don't know, couldn't do it. And then of course in the model worlds, and there are of course photographers who put little plastic figurines in there, but then I'm suddenly in a model railroad set, and I don't relate to that. But if I, walk like an early morning along Brooklyn streets and there's no one on the street, maybe someone like maybe down there, but there could be also a scratch on the plate, I feel much more comfortable. So it's also about how you relate to the space. But then over the years, I've never added people. Other elements in the image have sort of taken on the protagonist role, like the bookmobiles themselves, that Brooklyn bookmobile, kind of bitter and, but drawn by time. And then the Italian bookmobile more like wobbling along. So I mean, these become sort of characters to me, which have like a personality and almost a face. Not in the Disney way, but. And this is actually an interesting question. I'm going to paraphrase it because you probably didn't hear it. It's like my work is so much about processes, from the memory to building the model, to photographing, to make the plate, to reworking the plate, and what is the most important part of that, I think, to me, to summarize. And this actually goes back to what I'm telling my students too, that they have this idea, I want to achieve that. In their mind. So and then they embark on it, and then they do something, and they end up here, and they're totally frustrated because they're not on the way to getting their perfect result. So what I enjoy is the entirety of this artistic journey. So I'm embarking on a trip, and I don't quite know where it will lead me. So I may have an idea what the image should look like, but I'm not invested in it. It doesn't have to be this way. So I allow myself to be surprised and say, oh, wow, this is quite different. Sometimes, of course, it works in a way that I don't like it, and I have to sit back and wait and look at it and rethink it. But usually it ends up not from point A to point B, but from point A to C or D, and at another interesting place. So it's very much again like what happened to the Colosseum. You never, what was the goal of the Colosseum? We don't know yet. It's still there. It's still evolving. Or yeah. I would definitely agree with that. It's hard to actually pinpoint an exact example right now, but yeah, the material definitely influences the outcome. And I find that mostly when I do an artist residency somewhere else, and I cannot bring all the materials I have in my studio or the tools with me, especially like in Italy, where today you have to have the weight restrictions are so tight that it's very hard to travel. And if you have tools with you, oh my God. So I planned of just using books and paper as my material, my raw material. So that's why the bookmobile has text everywhere. And it became a very different thing than if I had like metal or wood in my studio, and I would have maybe built it more realistic. So frequently I need to or force myself to work with a material I may not feel very comfortable with, or reduce myself with my material options in order to come up with a more interesting result. Because I do always tend to become too realistic. So I have to fight that. In all the cases so far, she has finished the music before. So I may have heard segments and gotten the mood from it, but she finished the music before, written the score, and I could actually then listen to either a MIDI or actually a pre-recording of the piece, and then edits timed to the music. Here's another secret of my biography, which would have been too much to tell everything, but both my parents are musicians, and of course I had to play piano, and then I played double bass, and I played in an orchestra, and then when I was 17 I was sort of slated to study music, double bass. And I was very talented. Now I'm going back in circles again here. Except I hated to practice. So my double bass teacher put some music in front of it and said, oh, I can play this. Da-da-da-do. Beethoven's Fifth. Everyone knows it, except to the point where the double bass players are no longer playing the melody, but some accompaniment. It's like, and then, wait a minute, what music note is this? And then I slowed down to about a quarter of the time, and I had to be so I was just playing all by ear and imitating rather than reading and knowing and learning. And so my double bass player teacher said, you know what, I don't think this is going to work. I think you should reconsider. Don't study it. I'd already sent for application materials and all that. So you can probably imagine kind of a low blow. But then, I did find my passion in art. But since I've done that music thing, I relate. So I have a real deep understanding of music, timing, mood, and so on. So I'm almost like, feel like when I'm editing my video, I want that to dance to the music almost. Sort of that's like, at least sort of emotionally, that's how I think about it. And if the images, and I can't really pinpoint it. Like I look at the images, like, oh, this is too hectic. I need to slow this down. Or this is too dark. This is too light for this kind of music. I need to put something else here. So yes, my wife has been faster than me. Unfortunately not. We have a piano at home, and my wife actually got all the music I used to be able to play very well, but it's so frustrating since I haven't played in over 20 years. I start beautifully and then it's like, oh, I forgot, because I'm still playing just by ear, and the music is kind of like just a faint reminder of it, where the music may go next. Thank you all for coming. This was a great crowd.